The Drum Candy podcast is brought to you by Drum Factory Direct.
What's up, everyone? Welcome into episode 15 of the Drum Candy podcast. This is your host, Mike Dawson, and I'm coming to you from Drum Factory Direct in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. This week, I'm sitting down with Aaron Gilbert Steele. He is currently based out of Nashville. He's born in New York City, and his career has taken him all over the country. He started in New York in the underground indie rock scene, and then moved his way to LA. He got a gig on a TV show, TBS's Drop the Mic TV show, and then eventually he moved his way down to Nashville, where he's been transitioning from touring drummer to producer and songwriter. It's a great conversation. We get right into it from the beginning, kind of we go the whole gamut of how he got started, how he ended up all around the country. If you want to check out some of his work, check out the new, the latest, I guess it was last year, 2020, the Hayley Williams record. She is the front person for the band Paramore. She put out a record last year with Aaron on it. The drum sounds and the playing are just spectacular. He's also worked with bands, a bunch of indie rock bands, Portugal the Man. He toured with them for a bit. He's been in Fences. He's worked with Jose James, who I saw him play with live. That was incredible. They were playing the music of Bill Withers. He played that stuff beautifully. So he's been a journeyman, really awesome career, sweet guy, very knowledgeable. So we kind of dig right in. So let's check it out. Here's Aaron Gilbert Steele.
Yeah, man. It's funny. Anyway, yeah, we'll get to it. Let's.
Wait a minute. Get the what? Let's just start right there.
Oh no. I'm just saying it's increasingly, especially after COVID, or lockdowns or whatever. I've increasingly become more and more kind of like a lot of things don't matter as much. You know what I mean? So
you got to go further than that. What does it matter?
Like I don't care as much about what I'm using or like now when I work on people's records, it does. I don't even care what drum set ends up there. As long as the snare drum is cool, and I basically use the same cymbals all the time now, and it's kind of, and it's just depending on how I hit them, that's what the sound is. But it's very strange that my outlook on that has changed. Before I was oh man, I have things set up to do a certain thing, and now I'm kind of oh well, I mean, I can just make everything do the thing depending on how I muffle or tune instead of.
How did COVID do that?
Because I was working on stuff and I was kind of depressed, and people would send me things, and I'm I don't want to change my drum set, you know. And that's sort of what started that. But then after a while, I was I used to live like this back in New York. I would just show up to a studio and I would just bring a snare drum and cymbals and do the thing. And those records sounded great. But when I moved to LA, everybody convinced me that I needed to have this kind of array of equipment. And then there's kind of a fetishization of equipment too.
That's what this show's all about.
Yeah, no, I know. But but I do think that it's, I do think it's important, but I'm increasingly becoming more and more a believer that it's just more about the touch,
So do you think the secret to Steve Gadd was he was just depressed and he used the same old beat up cymbals and snare drum for 30 years?
Yeah, probably. I mean, he probably was depressed for a good chunk of it. And then, then he was just you know what? Let me stop doing coke. No, sorry. I'm sorry, Steve.
Oh, so what is your cymbal set then?
It has been basically since they came out, the Istanbul traditional jazz, just 22-inch ride, 20-inch ride, 14-inch hats. That's sort of what's set up at like my studio. Actually, my hats right now are the 17-inch hats that I've been playing for like 15 years. But basically, since I signed with Istanbul, like in last month was 14 years that I've been with that company, which is crazy. I feel like an old man.
But are those the 17s I saw you using with
with Jose? Yeah. They're like it's Sultan Crash on top, and then on bottom it's they don't make it anymore, or actually they don't make it anymore, but Alchemy Sweet Crash.
Okay, sounds like a brighter, heavier one.
Yeah, slightly. Yeah, I think that the closest thing that they have to that is a Exist Power Crash now.
Okay.
But I've been using I got the first cymbals that I got from Istanbul when I signed was a special edition jazz ride, and a Sultan Crash, a 17-inch Sultan Crash. And then like maybe a few weeks later, I was like, hey, can you give me another cymbal to make this into the Sultan Crash into a pair of hats? Like, what do you recommend to Scott over at Istanbul? And that dude's a genius when it comes to cymbals. Like, he can hear things that are gonna develop in the cymbal. Like, I don't understand. He'll send me a cymbal and he'll be like, it's a little bright right now, but like just play it for like 3 weeks every day or something, and it'll mellow out in these ways. And I'm just like, what? I'm like,
wild.
I usually don't take his advice, but when I do, I'm always like, you're right, you're so right. Yeah. Anyway, but since I got those, I've at least the two rides that I basically use as two big crashes and rides. I crash ride everything, even my hats. But they basically have been my main staple on like basically every record I've been working on for the last I'd say about year. And the hats, I use the same series hats a lot, but when I want to feel more like, I guess, me, or specifically me on people's records, I will go back to the 17s because I just feel more comfortable playing big old hats.
So what is the kit you have set up?
Right now, I'm doing some R&D stuff for Noble and Cooley.
Okay.
And they have one of these Tulip Union Series kits. And to tell you the truth, it just sounds really great. Like, like I opened it up and I was like, oh, okay, sounds great. Sounds like drums, but it's really easy to tune. Great. And I think I've gone through like a few different iterations of like what I was looking for in sounds. And my current iteration is just as much versatility from one thing as possible. So at least right now, what's set up is the Union kit with like kind of a shallower kick drum. It's a 22-inch kick drum that's 12 inches deep.
Okay.
And 22 is like a rarity for me. But I usually use a 20 or a 24. It's like I need to commit. Like
interesting.
22, I'm always like, man, it's like it's non-committal, so I feel like I'm a 110% all or nothing sort of person. So
yeah.
I'm like, yo, if I'm gonna go for that big bass drum sound, like just give me something big. Or and you can get a pretty huge sound out of a 20 as well. But this kit sounds, I mean, the low end on it is really great, but when you tune it up, it sounds great too. So right now that's, and the snare drum that I'm using, I switch between two at the moment, which is Noble and Cooley, like Tulip, a solid shell snare, and Jenkins Martin fiberglass snare. That they're both 8x14.
8x14, big boys.
Yeah, big boys. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't peg you for a middle of the road.
No, that's not my vibe at all. Like, yeah, like if I'm gonna play quiet, I'm gonna play real quiet. If I'm gonna play loud, I'm gonna beat the mess out of them drums. But yeah, I mean, but yeah.
So why an 8x14? What does that give you?
It's always kind of given me. I like to tune really big drums higher, so it gives me a little bit more depth on the high tuning, if that makes any sense. At least from like a little bit more body, if that makes sense. But I mean, I think that as far as, at least that's what I've been playing as of late. But then, like sometimes I switch out the snare drum a lot. That's like the one thing that I do switch out kind of often. When I have piccolos, like I'll tune them really low. It's like I have a CNC like maple poplar, like that. I had them make a copy of a jazz festival, like years ago, and so it's like 4x14. And that is like the lowest tuned snare that I have, and it sounds fat. But it's just funny that like that people will assume that that's gonna be like really high pitch, but I'm just like, nope, it's the opposite.
So why do that? Is it because it makes it faster, but you can get it lower?
Exactly, yeah, and it makes it faster. You can get it lower, and also, because of the shell depth, it doesn't take all that time in order to get the response from the snares, if that makes any sense. I think I'm more of a fan of short sounds than I am of like really long ones. Although I've been really getting into overtones recently, which is not something that I really did in the past, especially when I'm playing like more quote unquote jazz oriented or improvised stuff. That's something that I've just like noticed within the last couple of days, but besides,
really, very recent.
Yeah, very recent. Yeah, I mean, mainly because of that Noble and Cooley snare. Like I had it open for the first time just by mistake. I was playing. I was working out some stuff for a couple gigs that I have coming up that is more improvised, and I was playing my little Bob kit, and I was like, oh yeah, like, well, these are tuned up. Let me see what the snare drum sounds like. And I was like, whoa, okay, maybe I just want to do this all the time. But then I'm just kind of like, whatever. Like, then I was just like, that thought got into my mind, and I was just like, but it doesn't matter. Like that's kind of where I get to. Like, it's like kind of nihilistic. It's like, but it doesn't matter at all.
Yeah, nothing matters. That's
yeah, exactly. Yeah. As far as gear goes, that's kind of what's currently happening for me.
So this is your new place in Nashville.
Yeah. I'm living out in Madison, Tennessee, like slightly east of East Nashville.
Okay.
And yeah, so I'm extremely lucky that I have like this little room. In my old place, I had like another spare bedroom that was a lot smaller. But I got some pretty good sounds out of there. And in here, like over the last couple years, I've gotten way quicker and a lot more discerning about getting sounds in a space. And I realized that you can kind of, like, every space has their vibe. So, and that's when you find what that is. I think that you should spend a lot of time trying to figure out what that is. But that's the thing that you should accentuate whenever you're sending stuff to people. It's like, oh man, like, yeah, like this is what makes this space unique, you know?
So what have you found in that room?
In this room, there's a kind of like this crazy low mid bump, like kind of just like right at the end of where that piano is. Like, and that thing sounds crazy in like in a really good way. It's so like whenever I put a mic up, just like a ribbon mic, just like right around there, and depending on like the tune, I'll move it around a little bit, but that often ends up being like the bulk of the sound, depending on, you know, what project I'm working on. I mean, I do give close mics as well, but when I'm in the last couple of years, I've been doing a lot of production work. So when I'm working with people and I'm in charge of the sound, I rely heavily on like more of the color mics than the close mics. So like maybe like what I affectionately call the dick mic. I'll have
center of the kit.
Yeah, like center of the kit. I usually use, actually, I'll show you this right now. Hold on one sec. I usually use this like Dr. Alien Smith, like I think it's called the Dirt mic.
Okay. It's like a harmonica mic or something?
Yeah, with a distortion unit in it. But I use that as like my center of the kit mic. And then, like I said, I have a ribbon off to the side, and I also have like a telephone that's kind of like, my mics are all down right now because I'm gonna tear down my studio again. but I usually use like a telephone mic, kind of like facing up at the kit from the lower lower right corner, and then I use like the kick and snare. Like that's like where a lot of the sound comes from. Just depending on, you know, it changes very drastically with songs, but like that's like the thing that I gravitate more. It's a little bit crunchier, pretty lo-fi, but also works in a lot of pop formats. I mean, especially when you're pairing it with like programming, you're usually just trying to like add, at least in my situation, I'm usually trying to add like air and breath to programming that's happening in a lot of tracks. So like a sense of movement, because a lot of that stuff doesn't move at all. So
well, one of my questions was, what does it mean to be a producer in 2021? You're kind of already answering that for me.
Oh, well, there are several different kinds. There's a lot of people who just make beats. I do that sometimes, but I for me, I view myself as like a producer in a sense, in like the classic sense, old 70s. Like, hey, like, show me your songs, and then we're gonna try and find the best way to tell this story. Like I was working with artists recently where they showed me the demo of their tune. It was just like acoustic, and it sounded like a regular old Americana tune. And then I took it, and because the song was talking, there was a lot of urgency in the song, talking about how they're trying to convince their partner or somebody that they're never going to leave them in the song. But it seemed like that they were in the verse. It seemed like there was a time frame before this person left them because they were anticipating something. So basically, I made it go from like an Americana thing into like kind of like this weird like car chase like
interesting
driving thing, because it kind of because I was trying to accentuate the fact that there was a time frame that you needed to convince this person that you were still involved and still love them. You know, that was kind of like that's kind of how it worked in my head. But then it turned out, I was like, oh man, this is kind of sick. It's like even did a different thing than I was expecting, but it actually ended up framing the song in a way that everybody was happy with. So,
what did you start with?
What I actually started with was toms on that song. I made a tom loop that was just boop, 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 like just the whole time, and then I just played a kind of like semi drum and bass groove over it. But actually, the very first thing I started with is I had the artist sing in my living room, just guitar and vocal, as if it were just going to be a regular Americana song, in order to kind of trick people at the beginning of the song. But you know, this person's transitioning out of kind of Americana world into a different thing. So and the idea is like not to completely alienate everybody that has been listening to them. So, yeah. So like at least that's where I started. And then we use a lot of the crunchy mics for that, you know. And then I ran a bunch of stuff through a bunch of really cheap things that people love, like a SP404 or, you know, yeah. You know what I mean?
So when do you decide, or what cues you that you need to program versus perform something?
The intention behind it. So if it's not necessarily like that I need to, like if I'm gonna do, like, sometimes what I'll do is if I want it to have more of a human feel and I want programmed sounds like 808s or whatever, I'll just perform it on a real drum set and just trigger it, you know? And some people think that like, oh, like I programmed that, but I'm just like, no, like there's no way I could have programmed that, because it feels like way too, it's like moving around all over the place, you know? But if I'm programming something, more if I want it to be very robotic, like that's when I decide that I'm going to actually program something. Or if I'm trying to make something a little generative. So, something that kind of is a long pattern that just like repeats over, like, I don't know, an odd number of bars. I'll program that, and then I'll play something organic on top of that in order to sort of make it feel a little bit more ambiguous. But it's all by case basis. It's like it depends on genre too. Like if I'm working with a hip hop artist, more often than not, I'm gonna program stuff unless I'm going for like a 90s vibe, and then I will play a bunch of stuff, run it through an old sampler, then layer like certain aspects of it with program sounds. But that's like that's just more like hunting for like what is the thing that's most compelling for the song. It's not necessarily like I don't have like a, oh, I do this just because it's this style of music. It's like not necessarily it doesn't necessarily work that way for me. Just because the best thing, the best music, at least in my opinion, is things that kind of throw out the rules most of the time. So if like everybody's done everything in specific genres now, so like now you have to just grab from other things. At least for me, that's the thing that excites me the most, is that I'm lucky that I've been able to play so many different kinds of music, and that I enjoy playing so many different kinds of music. So that's given me, and I listen to so much stuff from various different genres, various different artists, that I'm able to like, you know, I'll be on a pop session, I'll be like taking from a Jim Black show that I saw at the Stone like 10 years ago, you know, and people are like, where does that idea? Oh, that's crazy, you know, that sort of thing. And I'm just like, oh, well, it's just, you know, it's this dude. He was my hero when I was a kid, you know, still is my hero now. Yeah. Yeah. You should check him out. Yeah. And then they're like, oh man, this is weird. I'm like, yeah, I know, but that's where I got that idea from. You know, still my hero.
Are you constantly like researching, investigating, looking for new music?
Not in the same way as I used to be. But I do, I ask a lot of people to give me recommendations often. And, you know, for as much as this company is sort of the devil, Spotify's like recommended for me, the algorithm that they have is like kind of on point. So I find like new things often through my Discover Weekly. Yeah, so I at least for me, it's been like really good. But also, yeah, I mean, you know, like I listen to really weird stuff. So
yeah, you've sent me some stuff before.
yeah, it's like I listen to such weird music, and you know, like I can compartmentalize things that I like about it. So it's like it's not necessarily like, oh, the whole piece is great. But like it's like, oh man, I really love this one rhythm that's happening in this. Or more often than not, I think the whole piece is great, but I don't. But I also listen to music for parts of things, not necessarily just because the whole thing is up my alley.
Now, was that a result of your upbringing? Were you checking out classical music at an early age, or how did you get into this different music?
I grew up in New York, man. Like,
yeah,
you know, like everything was kind of happening at once, and I have to really credit Kenny Grahowski. He's a drummer who lives in New York. He plays with the Secret Chiefs and does a lot of stuff with John Zorn. His grandfather's Bobby Cruz, so he has a bunch of Grammys from like playing on like a lot of like those old Latin records. But he taught me how to play drums, and one of the things that he told me kind of early on is like, you should listen to as much music as you can because there's always something to learn from it, you know? And that was like a really big deal for me. And, you know, like, and that being said, like, I was one of those kids that I was like, I wasn't really allowed to listen to secular music. You know, I grew up in church and my parents are pretty strict. So like every night I would be making mixtapes on like, you know, like very like secretly Like it would go from, you know, early Nas stuff to Metallica being the next thing to Rick Astley. You know, it was like the weirdest mixtapes ever. But
you get them from the radio, or you're like borrowing
from the radio? Yeah.
Okay.
And then it was a lot from radio, and then at a certain point I started going to Norm's Music in like Lower East Side of Manhattan, which I think now it's in Williamsburg, but I started going there, and then I got really into punk, kind of like early emo stuff. Just at the drive-in, I bought their album In Casino Out, and it changed my life, because it kind of made me understand that music wasn't like an emotional thing. It wasn't just like shredding. I mean, you know, growing up in church, like you connect emotion with shredding, if that makes any sense. Like the more intense things are, the more notes are being played. But I learned from like a lot of punk bands or hardcore bands that actually the space that happens, like from the breakdown, like that can make things really intense. And then in turn, like I start like weirdly, because I ended up listening to a bunch of punk bands. I ended up getting into a lot of Americana stuff because a lot of those people in those worlds ended up making a lot of Americana records, which is like very like, you know, like I forget I think it was the dude from like Alexis on Fire ended up doing Color into Shape.
Right.
I think that was it. But like a lot of those people were like, oh, like I want to do like more of a Bob Dylan-y sort of thing. And then I ended up like kind of like getting into a lot of that stuff. But at the same time, I was still going to see Jim Black at the Stone. You know, it's like, and then my brother is like a big hip hop dude. So he's an incredible drummer, great producer. His name is Daniel Steele. He plays in a band called King's Kaleidoscope. But he came up listening to nothing but underground hip hop. And for me, and like, because he was a record collector and stuff like that, he was always sampling off of like old classical records, and like, like, you know, one of my favorite composers is Arvo Part, and I think that I found him kind of early and realized that his sense of harmony like really resonated with me. But I don't know. Now we got into a rabbit hole.
Yeah, it's wild. So I did have a question here. Growing up in New York, how do you even deal with being a drummer? Do you have drums at home? Do you have to go somewhere to play? I mean, how does one become a drummer?
I didn't have drums at home. There's drums at my church. And that was kind of the only time I got to play, even though it wasn't that often at a certain point, especially early on. Like, so I'd say that I didn't really get my first drum set until I had to go on my first tour. And that was actually pretty crazy. But that being said, like, you know, when you play in church, you have to sort of get good really quick in order to stay on the seat, if that makes any sense.
Yeah.
So it wasn't necessarily that I had to get like really chopsy really quick, but more of I just had to make stuff feel pretty good. Also, the other drummer at my church was my brother at first. So at a certain point, he stopped going to church, and then I just ended up becoming a drummer. Then he came back, and then I ended up going to another church. It was like a whole thing. But what you got? Then it was like there's like levels to it, but then even for a while I quit playing drums, and I like started to focus my life on being. I was a breakdancer for years, and
no kidding.
yeah, like my sense of time, I think, comes from the time that I took away from the drums and just was dancing. So
Nice.
I feel things in very small, I feel things in very small beats normally, just because of kind of trying to keep track of like motions in dancing.
Mm.
But if I didn't spend those years dancing, like my beat would be way wider than it is
Mhm.
now. But you know, like I noticed that in other people. I was doing an improvised gig last night with my friend Ross McReynolds. He's another drummer here in Nashville, and his beat is like way wider than me. And like I was like, no, like we were like playing, and I was like, whoa, you're feeling that way differently. Like, and it's cool because it's like we just have a difference of perspective, like everyone does. Like he knows who he is on the instrument, and that's like such a big thing. Like when like everybody trying to be the same version of the same thing, like blows my mind. But when somebody really knows himself and then they dig into it, like I don't know, a good version of that is Jay Bellerose. Like I've talked to him about it before, and he was like, yeah, like people hated my stuff for a long time, and then one day people were like, oh, you played on that thing, oh man, you want to play on my thing? Like,
yeah, right.
you know, and then it went, him being 1,000% himself became a thing. And then they are a bunch of, not, I wouldn't call them copycats. I say there are a bunch of people who really admire his thing, and then they think that the way to basically, people think that they have to do the same thing in order to kind
Get to that level.
To that level. But I kind of think it's the opposite. It's just like learning as much about yourself as possible and learning about what you really love instead of just yanking somebody's thing. And you can take things, like everybody's always taking something, but I don't know, like this got into a broader conversation. So.
That's what it's all about. I mean, do you think not having access to drums in the beginning fostered your creative imagination for rhythm? Were you just like thinking about drumming more than like actually having sticks in your hands?
I think that actually might be a thing. But I definitely wasn't, I wasn't as obsessed with it as a lot of people are early on. For me, I became more obsessed with it after, because basically I went on tour. I was in a band in high school that was like crazy, but it was, and the only reason I kind of ended up in that band was because my friend was like, yo, like, I know you play drums. I've seen like drumsticks at your house. Like, our drummer just quit our band. Can you play drums for these shows? And I was like, I don't play drums anymore. Like, it's cool. And then he was kind of like, just play a few shows. And then I ended up playing with that band for years. So it's kind of like one of these things that after I was on tour with them and doing it for a while, like I realized that I fell in love with it. And it was kind of like, okay, well, you know, like, how do I do, like, the band broke up and I was like, how do I do this but not be in a band, because I was a little fatigued from that situation. And then everybody told me I had to go to school, and that was like the worst decision I ever made. But but for me, because I, you know, like growing up in New York, I could have just taken lessons with literally anybody, and it would have like cost me way less money. But I mean, before I went to school, I took lessons at Ari Honig. You know, it's like just to get my chops up in jazz world, because I was playing in a hardcore band before that. You know, so, you know. But luckily I had access to like Kenny Grahowski, who steered me in a very what is it? In a good path, because he plays all different kinds of music, and crushes all of it. And it's not because he doesn't sound like himself. It's literally because of he is himself, and it just works in a lot of context. And I think that that's one of the biggest things that I learned from him. It's like, you don't have to do one thing, I mean, if you don't want to. A lot of people just want to do one thing, and that's okay.
Yeah, right. Yeah. So what pulled you from New York to move west?
Hurricane Sandy.
Oh,
yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. I was working, sort of. I moved to LA because I didn't really understand. I was like, okay, well, I guess I'm in New York. Things are cool, but like, people keep telling me that LA has all the stuff. And I moved there. I got a pretty big gig. I hated it. Moved back to New York, and then I just started playing with a bunch of my friends' bands, and they were all like these cool like indie electro bands and stuff like that. And because I was playing with them and doing a bunch of Ableton stuff, I started to get hired in LA to do that, because there was, at the time, no one in LA knew how to run Ableton.
Okay.
So not no one, but very few people. And I've sort of been using it since version 6, something like that. So kind of a long time. And then I got hired to play with an artist, and while I was rehearsing with them, Hurricane Sandy happened and kind of destroyed my apartment. But then I went on tour with them for a few months, and then went on tour with another artist for a few months after that. Had to come back to LA to rehearse with that first artist. And by that point I was gone for a while, and I was like, might as well get an apartment, so, if I'm going to be here, and I'll get an apartment for a year. And then I ended up there for like 7. So, okay. So that's how I ended up there. And I was like, I hate LA. So I like working there, but I hate living there.
Yeah. I mean, I can't imagine from downtown New York to LA being a comfortable switch.
Oh no way. Yeah. I mean, it was a huge culture shock.
Yeah, I'm sure.
Yeah.
What does it mean running Ableton? Like, you were one of the few people that knew how to run Ableton, like live, like running it on gigs, or
running it on gigs. Yeah.
Okay. Because
when I was getting called by a lot of people to downsize their band, basically. So I was either the only band member, or I was one of like 2 people.
Oh wow. Okay.
And that sort of started at a certain point, and like I was like, that's what I was doing, and that's like all I was doing for years, and it was like driving me insane. And then actually, about when I joined Portugal, that was like the first time I was playing with like people again, which is kind of nuts, And I love playing electronic music, but like it ended up being a thing where people were hiring me to do like the Ableton backing tracks, build the sets and all this stuff, and their music required people, and it didn't make any sense that they were trying to downsize in this way. I was like, you just need a band. If you just had a band and just played this, it would be 8 times better. So I just started saying no, and then I eventually got called by the Portugal dudes just to be in the band, and there's like no click or anything in that band. So I was like, what? This is great. I'm really grateful to those guys for that, actually, for that time period. But because like they kind of got me out of a weird musical depression at that point. But yeah. Anyway, but that's people were just hiring me to do that. And technically people call it an MD now, but they didn't really give me that title.
Yeah, drummer with a laptop.
Yeah, exactly. They were just like, oh yeah, like there's somebody else who's MD. I was like, oh, well, I'm doing all the chopping and all this stuff. Anyway.
So then what took you from LA to Nashville?
I definitely wanted to leave LA, and This is kind of, so I had a loft in downtown LA, me and my girlfriend, and we had a big flood, and from a rainstorm, we were in New York. Like every time my place gets destroyed by water, I'm like gone. So, so yeah, I know, it was nuts. My friend was like cat sitting for us, and there was like a big rainstorm in LA, and we had like a leak that we had been asking our landlords to take care of for like 8 months, and then but they didn't take care of it because like it never rains in LA. But this one time that I was in New York, like visiting my family, me and my girlfriend were gone, and then crazy rainstorm. It like flooded our entire loft, and like my friend who was cat sitting for us, like she just sent me a video of like her pouring out water from like my WFL kick drum. You know, it's like, you know, I was like, no, I was like, you know, I was like, crazy. Anyway, so they moved us into a different unit in the building. And in my lease agreement, it was like, yeah, like you can work from this time to this time at the place. But when they moved us into a different unit, even though it was a part of my lease, there was a new building manager because the old building manager left the building. This is a really long story. Left the building because of the way that the company who owned all the stuff treated us, like, because they didn't want to pay for a lot of the stuff that was damaged. It was a whole bunch of things. Anyway, but new building manager came to me while I was in the middle of a session, and he was like, you can't play. And I was like, well, actually it's a part of my lease. This is like literally why we moved here. It's not our fault we're in this unit. You guys put us here after you were negligent and destroyed a bunch of my stuff. So, and they were like, oh, I'm sorry. Well, you can't do that anymore. And I'm just like, there with an artist, you know? And luckily this person was my friend. Luckily a lot of the artists I work with are my friends, but he was like, he was on the phone with another friend of ours, like, I think Aaron's moving out of LA right now, you know, like right now. Yeah. And then I like called my girlfriend and I was like, hey, I love you. I think I'm going to move to Philadelphia, like in a couple weeks. And then she got headhunted for a job here in Nashville. And she was like, hey, like, this company called me and maybe you want to try Nashville. I was like, I got some friends there. Let's see if it works. And, you know, we've been here for 3.5 years, and it's been cool. You know, own a house now, which I never thought I ever would. You know, growing up sort of like in the projects, you don't think that that's going to happen at some point, but it does.
That's amazing.
Which is really, you know, I'm really grateful. Yeah.
Were you able to learn all these transitions? Were you still working with the same artists, or was it always different artists every time you move?
I have somehow, it's different artists, but they're not ever, for some reason, they're not mainly based wherever I live. People kind of see me as a person who kind of can be anywhere. I don't know how I created that, but I'm grateful for it, you know? Because, you know, like I think early on I was kind of like, hey, if you need me, just call me, and then like I'll show up. Like I don't like, because I'm not severely tied to like, for example, in Nashville, I'm not a part of the Nashville music community. Like I don't really play on country stuff. Not really. I mean, I do some country sessions, but like that's pretty rare. I'm kind of more a part of the indie rock community here, which is cool. But that's also because of like when I was in Portugal, I toured with Cage the Elephant a bunch, and I played on Hayley Williams' record, and those two situations are my friend circle here. So that ends up being more on the rock, like rock side of things, and more on the like alternative rock side of things, and all of their friends are more on like the indie side of things, and like that ends up being like, and also like those are people that I really love, like like they're like really good friends. So I end up just playing with my friends here, but then people are like, oh man, who's this guy? Like, we've never, like, what are you trying to do in town? And I'm like, I'm good, man. Like, I have a career. It's like, fine. You know, like, are you a live guy, studio guy? I'm like, I'm good. I don't like, it doesn't matter. Yeah. It's like,
oh, you don't fall into the networking game.
yeah. I mean, especially here, like, cause you know, I don't really care to, and not because I think that it's, not because I think that, like, I don't think it's valid to do that, but I think I'm not your typical drummer who just wants to be on whatever gig. I kind of care. I care about what I'm doing. Not to say that people don't, but a lot of drummers will take gigs because it's a gig and it pays money. And not that there's anything wrong with that, but I can't do that because you could see my disdain on my face. And I want to do the best job for whoever I'm working with. And the way I can do that is by being totally down with the music and the people. So, and the best way to do that for me is just not taking stuff that I don't like. And doing the networking thing just to get a call for whatever doesn't make any sense to me. Like, if I like an artist, I'll go to that artist show, and if I want to play with an artist, it's like really, I don't really, luckily I have like credits now. So like I can be like, hey man, I like really dig your stuff. Like maybe we could work together on something. And more often than not now, like I'm like, yo, let's get together and let's write some music together. That's kind of more, I mean, I'm doing a lot of that now. So, but that being said, it's just really, I think that we as musicians do a disservice to ourselves by playing on stuff that we don't like. And then we perpetuate the thing that we don't like. We give that more of a platform than the things that we actually believe in. I've gotten to where I'm at in life because I've believed in my friends and they all ended up becoming successful. And it wasn't because I have more talented friends than other people. It's because I believed in them. And then those breaks just happened because people were trying to prop them up because people believed in them. And I was just one of those many people. And then my career is like tangentially connected to all these different artists that that I thought and still think are great. So I kind of implore people to like just believe in their friends that they think are super dope and just keep working with them, because if you're there with them from day one, why would they ever like be like, ah man, this, like, especially if you're like killing it on their gig because you care so much, you know? Yeah, especially nowadays, because like everybody wants to be a musician and whatever. Like, then I'm like, if you're gonna do that, then do it for something that you believe in, because like, what's the point of doing something you hate within the thing that you love? It just doesn't make any sense.
Yeah, but so that's what almost everyone falls into, that trap.
Yeah,
you got to make money.
Yeah, I mean, and that's true. But I mean, I don't know. Like, I grew up with not very much money, so I know that you can survive. You know, and there are moments where I don't make much money, and then like something comes along that's like, oh, this is crazy. You know, like it's like, oh, okay, great. You know, but I think that for me, at least, that this happens because people know that I believe in the things that I'm going to be doing and that I'm going to that I'm going to crush on their gig because I believe in it and I have the skill set to do it. But that sounds a little vain, but you know what I mean?
Oh, and yeah, no, that's just the truth. Yeah. So what gear
go ahead.
made the trip around the country with you? Anything, or do you leave stuff behind and start over?
No, actually, like, this is really funny. I had a habit of wherever I landed, I just got a new drum set back in the day because I was like, oh, well, I used to play in this band called Fences and we made a record in Seattle. I bought a drum set in Seattle just because like I was like, oh, well, I can't really ship my drums. I guess I'll just get a drum set here. And I left it there for like years. And then in New York, anyway, but that being said, when I moved to Nashville, I got a house instead of like a loft or an apartment. I ended up like getting all of my stuff from everywhere and then just bringing it here. And now I'm going to probably sell all of it.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. To tell you the truth. But the one thing that has stayed with me since the relative beginning of my career is a 71 Ludwig kit that was my only kit for a long time. It's a 22 1316 and a 61 26-inch marching bass drum. That is and it's all like old white, not like the current version of White Marine Pearl. It's like the other one. And that kit sounds incredible, and it's on so much stuff, so many things that I've worked on, so many records. But right now it's in a closet, and I haven't really touched it in a while. But that being said, like I'll never get rid of that kit because it was, for the longest time, it was the only drum set I owned.
Did that start in New York?
That started in New York. I bought it at Main Drag Music.
Okay.
For $1,000. And John, who was one of the owners at Main Drag, it was like really messed up. Basically, somebody had caved in the top of it, and he repaired it by, I guess, like separating, like steam heating the whole thing and like separating the plies and then putting like a metal bar inside in order to like repair the shell. And I think it's like kind of one of the best sounding, like it's one of the best sounding Ludwig kits that I've heard. And I'm really grateful to own it because like I've left it. I used to leave it at a studio in New York, and when I took it back, they were like really bummed. Like they're just like everyone uses this kit. They have a bunch of kits. They're just like everyone uses only this one. And I'm just so
you left that when you went to LA. You left it in New York.
Yeah, I left it in New York. Yeah,
okay.
And then when I like at that point I was a CNC artist. So when I moved to LA, I just took my first CNC kit with me, which is a copy of a Sonar teardrop kit. That I have a Sonar like that. That's actually been with me everywhere. A Sonar teardrop kit that I got. It was like the second drum set I bought. And that's been with me everywhere. It's here too, but it's like set up with like hairy goatskin heads right now. But I like don't play it at all. It's like in its cases right now. And the more I the more I work on people's records, I'm like, you just want a good sounding kick drum. Great. Unless I'm trying to do like a really esoteric thing, but that's more often than not like that's like a sample day. I could rent drums for that. But
I can dig it. So you're getting into that mode. That goes back to the beginning when you're like, just this is my drum set.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly. And I don't, like, especially because like a lot of stuff, like unless I'm like doing like a real like metal thing, or like I don't need like all this stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe some accessories though.
Mm.
But yeah. Like that. I'm trying to think of. There's also this snare drum that's lasted with me a really long time. Hold on a second. Turn off my light. Great. All right, but can you see that?
That's the snare drum?
Yeah, it used to be a tom.
It looks like a 13.
It's a 14 by 10. It's a 14 by 10. 14 by 10.
Jeez.
That's an analogy for my life. It's a 14 by 10 rat tom that it's like a pearl fiberglass shell that John from Main Drag made me basically around the time that he sold me that Ludwig kit.
Mm-hmm.
And that's been with me everywhere, and I use it all the time. It's although like I got to get it repaired because the inserts on the lugs on one of them broke because I tuned it too tight because I'm an idiot. But that's an easy repair.
What was the first snare drum that you bought?
First snare drum that I bought? Precision Drum Company.
Okay.
Just like a maple snare drum, 6-ply maple with like Yamaha style wood hoops on it. Okay. Because I really wanted to be Billy Cobham at a certain point.
All right.
Panamanian drummer. I'm a Panamanian, so I just really like the side stick with those wood hoops is really nice, but it got really dark. I'm sorry. With those wood hoops is kind of nice. But yeah, so that was the first snare drum I bought, and then this may be the second snare drum I bought.
You don't have many metal drums.
I do. I have a lot.
Okay. Everything you talked about has been wood or fiberglass.
Yeah. I have a Q copper. That was like my main snare drum for a while. I play often a 65 a 65 Ludwig Superphonic.
Okay.
It's so ratty. It's like the steel is, it's like the chrome is all pitted and stuff, but that's the drum that I left in LA. That's the drum that I usually leave in LA. Cause I have my old CNC kits in LA, and I leave a set of cymbals and that snare drum normally, but I had to take it with me I played Lollapalooza recently, and I had to take it with me to Lollapalooza. So it's with me now, but when I go back to LA, I'm taking it back. Just because it's like that snare drum just works on everything. So that or like an Acrolite, they just both work on everything. So I keep that usually in LA. But that what else? What other? I have like a Noble and Cooley Alloy Classic. I have a nickel over brass CNC. I have the very first one that they made. Serial number 1 for that one. I have what else do I have as far as metal snare goes? I have a bunch of Acrolites.
Yeah, me too.
I have a Blackrolite. I have a CNC version of Acrolite. I have a
the 6.5 reissue.
I don't have the 6.5 reissue, but I was thinking about getting it a while ago, and then I was just like, why am I doing this?
Yeah.
You know, like that was kind of the thing. And I also have like what is it, that pork pie B.O.B. Like that snare drum is funny. Like for the longest time I was like using it like just like out, because it was like, oh, this is a simple snare drum to take out and it just works, and everybody's like, what is that? And I'm like, this is the cheapest snare drum I own.
Yeah, it's like a $200 drum.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it sounds great. That's a testament to what Bill was doing over there. Yeah, honestly, you know. The thing is, like, you don't need expensive stuff in order to sound good. Actually, sometimes it's the opposite. Like for me, I mean, you know, no shade on DW, but I can't play a DW. It's like the notes are too long. Like, and the kick drum, I can never get it to sound the way I want it to. So that's not necessarily, like, you know, they got it to their desired specs, but for me, like, it just doesn't work for anything I do. Personally, I can never get it to work. But yeah, I mean, you know, man, that was like really specific. I'm sorry. I'm talking about DW.
I'm going to get way specific. I was listening to the Haley Williams record.
Yeah.
Do you remember the snare drums you used on Simmer Down?
Yeah, I do.
Like 3 drums on that, right?
Yeah. So on the main snare is a Rogers satellite snare, which is like kind of a pancake. They were making some weird stuff in the 60s, which is awesome. That snare drum belongs to Taylor, who produced the record.
Okay. And
he has so many drums. It's crazy. And he is not a drummer. He plays guitar. He has a lot of everything. Like, anyway, but
yeah.
That, and then that was the main snare drum. The low snare that I'm pretty sure is panned to the left on the mix. That is a Q plate brass, 8.5 by 14. That's maybe the craziest snare drum ever. Like, I haven't bought one of those, but like that might be maybe one of my favorite snare drums ever. Like that was on loan for that recording, and I was like, really, I should have just bought one. But what you got? But I'm trying to get out of that mindset, like, you know. And then the other snare drum is a early prototype of one of those pancake drums that Jeremy made, from Q, made with Rami from A&F. Like,
okay.
And it's like I think it's a 12 pancake.
Yeah. Okay.
And I have it tuned up kind of high, but everything is a little muffled on that situation. Yep. But yeah, like those are the snare drums. The kick drum is a CNC travel kick drum that Taylor owned too, and then old A hi-hats, and like an ohm ride, like a 24-inch ohm ride.
Damn, you knew everything. What beater were you using?
I was using a Zorro. Yeah, I took a picture of it, and somebody asked me about it pretty recently, so like that's why I remember all that.
It's super distinct. It's some of my favorite sounds I've heard,
dude.
Ever, honestly, dude,
like a lot of that has to do with Carlos, the guy who mixed it. He's a drummer. If you go to his house, like he has everything, like literally everything, and just specifically for drums, like he gets the best drum sounds, and he makes a lot of records with Elon Rubin. So yeah, and he's mixed the last couple Paramore records. So but he's maybe one of my favorite mix engineers. So like that on top of like getting some really good sounds, he recorded everything as well as mixed it. So yeah, he's a nasty boy.
Well, we are at the end. So what is in store for the rest of 2021 for you? You're going to move? Where are you going?
No, I'm not moving. At least not right now. 2021. I'm producing a lot of records, and a lot of stuff is coming out in the next couple years, next year and a half. So at the moment, what's happening is that I'm just producing records. I got a really great opportunity pre-COVID with this producer named Tyler Johnson, who did the last Harry Styles album. And we started working together as he was writing some stuff with the Portugal guys, and he happened to live in Nashville. And they were like, yo, you should meet Aaron. And then we ended up just working together on me playing drums on a bunch of stuff. And he told me one day that I was more valuable than just playing drums on people's records. And then he sort of started bringing me into productions. And then
awesome,
it's been working out. So that's what my life is kind of turning into. I'm still playing with people. Right now I've been playing a lot with an artist named Joy Oladokun, who she's pretty great. Her songwriting is incredible. And I work on a lot of people's records just playing drums too. So obviously I can't talk about some of those, but I'm really grateful for people wanting me to do my thing on their records. It's like, oh yeah, they literally just call me like, hey, can you just do your thing? I was like, sick. Yeah, thanks. Yeah, I'll do that.
Perfect scenario. I need that. Someone please call me and tell me to do your thing. But
yeah, man.
I should probably define what the hell my thing is.
Oh man, you got some stuff happening. Man, come on. I think you have a pretty tight thing.
It's all over the place. It's a schizophrenic thing. It is.
Dude, what do you got? But that is a language in itself,
Yeah.
Anyway, well, but yeah, that's what's happening.
Right on, man. Well, thank you so much. This has been it went fast. Hour and 10 minutes.
Oh, imagine man. That. Sorry, I'm a babbler.
I think we got to almost all my questions. I didn't ask you about your solo track. Are you putting more solo music out, or is that just a one-time thing?
No, I am putting more solo music out, but it's funny. Short answer, I got really annoyed with the process of putting out music by myself. But I have an EP that's done. I have like a lot of issues with promoting stuff on my own because I'm super ADD. But I'm actually in the middle of like working on another EP that's a tribute to Chico Hamilton. Nice. But with like synthesizers and Simmons drums.
Sick.
But that's gonna be a minute before that one comes out. But the solo record will come out. The first solo EP will come out pretty soon. Probably by the end of the year.
Sick, man. Well, thank you.
Yeah, of course.
Look forward to touching base with you next year once all this stuff comes out.
Yeah, man. And also, thanks for having me on, man. Like it feels really funny to be on drum podcasts and stuff like that, but because I don't see myself as a thing, but I really appreciate when it happens because I realize how much it weirdly means to me.
Big.
Yeah. So thanks, man.
Well, that's it for episode 15. Please, if you enjoy the show, like and share it, and write a review on iTunes, wherever you get your podcast. That helps spread the word. And we will back next week, same time. See you then. Have a good one, and thanks for listening.